What do these four cards have in common? They're all made with my 3-ingredient, 2-minute card recipe. 3 of them have one small variation, but all 4 of these cards are not only easy to pull together in 2 minutes, but it's also easy to make multiples with them. Yesterday, I made 28 of these in about 3 hours. Let me show you how. The 3 ingredients in the recipe are card base, panel, and 1 die cut. That's it. Here it is in its simplest form. I started with a white card base and I added a red panel that I cut to 4 inches by 5¼ inches, so I would get a narrow white frame around it. And then I just added a simple white Mary die cut. Choosing a word die cut means that it's really kind of doing double duty as the focal point and the sentiment. Red and white is a classic Christmas color combination, and this simple font keeps the whole thing looking clean. I used red cardstock here. Red is one of the few cardstock colors that I actually keep on hand. The only thing I'm worried about with this one is the reason it looks so good is because that red cardstock is absolutely perfect. No marks or bumps or creases, and I'm not sure if it'll stay this way through the mail. So if you've got time, a quick option is to use an embossing folder on your panel. Here I chose a soft aqua cardstock. This is another color I keep on hand for quick Christmas multiples for my church Christmas card project. This 3D hexagon folder from Sizzix has different levels, which gives it an irregular, bumpy background that'll hide any little blemishes it might pick up on its journey through the post. This time, instead of a word die, I chose a snowflake from Waffle flower. When you're choosing a single image die to be your focal point, you really want it to symbolize the occasion. If you had time, you could add some stickles or gems to the snowflake to give it a little festive sparkle. Here's another card. This time it's a Christmas tree from a company called Frantic Stamper with a plaid 3D embossing folder from Spellbinders. Now, actually, I don't really like the die cut you get from this one. It has cutouts to make a shaker, but I do really like the simple shape of the tree, so I like to leave the negative space whenever I use it. If I wanted to add something more to this, I would add some gold embellishments to represent ornaments. Lately, I've been enjoying making my own embellishments. I have the Lots of Dots dies from Gina K Designs, and I just cut them from honey gold cardstock and keep them on hand in a little container. I like that these dies are cut a variety of sizes of circles. I like that they're flat and they won't cause any trouble in the mail, and when I run out, I love that I can just make more in any color or texture or finish that I want. Now here's my final card. It looks more complex, and it is in a way, but it's also as simple as a card base, a yellow panel, and a big nativity die cut. This time I stepped it up a bit by making my own yellow panels with some watercolor powders. I find that this is a super fast way to create lots of colored cardstock. It's actually easier to make multiples when using these powders, and I like to tape off the size of a full piece of paper on my desk so I know where the powders need to go. I chose 4 yellow colors by looking at my swatch chart, including a shimmery gold for some sparkle, although most of the Lindy's Magicals I have already have a bit of shimmer in them. I want to get a lot of variation on my panels so that they look hand-painted. This is kind of a cheater way of getting that look, I guess. I need 28, so I counted out 7 sheets of Nina index paper. This is thinner than my normal panel cardstock, but thicker than printer paper, and I like working with it when I'm using my gel plate or a technique like this. I sprinkled the powders down within my taped off area, and then I got out my big water spritzing bottle. You want to dissolve the powders in quite a bit of water, and you can see how the pigments separate. I put down the first piece of paper and I pressed my fingers into it. When I picked it up, I really wasn't in love with it, to say the least. I find these things are a little bit like pancakes. The first one's never the best one, but I did rescue this one by sprinkling more powder on it and adding even more water. Then I repeated the process 6 more times, adding powder and water as needed. And honestly, not really loving any of them. But I remembered the cardinal rule of watercolor. You don't really hate it until you hate it when it's dry. And that's just an awkward way of saying, once it's dry, it pretty much always looks better. Once they were all done, I let them dry while I worked on something else. Now here's a look at the dry panels. They are definitely warped, but one thing I love about this paper is that it's light enough that it easily flattens out once it's glued to a card base. Next, I trimmed the panels into 28 card fronts that were 3 3/4 inches by 5 inches. I have a big trimmer with a measurement bar that helps to make sure that my cuts are consistent, and in the end, all the panels were exactly the same size. Next, I grabbed some thin black cardstock to use for my intricate die cut. This is another way that this card is a little more complex than the first three I showed you. It's a big die cut with a look of stained glass, which means there's lots of offcuts that fall away. I taped the little star die into the star area so I'll get an outline, and then I fed it through my Gemini Junior. When it came out, I needed to have a piercing tool on hand to help pop out all the pieces. And those pieces around the star especially were stuck to the tape, so that took a little extra time. As I worked, I developed a routine, and I also trimmed back the tape so that the pieces weren't quite as difficult to poke out. Just the star in the center really had to be popped out with the tool. Cutting 28 of these took me about 45 minutes. At this point, I thought that maybe spritzing the black die cuts with shimmer spray might make them look more metallic and like stained glass. So I tried it out with two of them. And it looks okay, but I really didn't love it enough to spend the time spritzing them and then waiting for them to dry. So only two of them look like this. The rest are plain black. It's okay to change your plan as you go if things aren't working out the way you thought they would. Speaking of which, when I laid the black stained glass die cut onto the yellow panel and then onto a white card, I hated it. I honestly thought of just starting all over again. But before I let myself get too dramatic, I added a simple black mat to the yellow panel. Again, this was a quick session with the black cardstock in my trimmer, and having that frame made all the difference. It gave more definition and a much more finished look. Another solution would have been to use black card bases, but my solution used up less of my black cardstock, and it also meant I could use my thin black cardstock from Michaels rather than my lovely thick black cardstock. So the next step was to glue the yellow panels onto the black mats. This was pretty easy, but I find that I am better at putting it down evenly if I stand up while I'm doing it. I must just be able to get a better view of the whole panel. Next, it was time for the die cuts. I had to use liquid glue for these, but again, over time, I got into a routine of where to put down the dots of glue. I don't worry about getting it all over the whole die cut, just around the edges and then on any areas on the inside that might lift if they're not glued down. It was easy to place the die cut on the card. The flat bottom went along the bottom edge of the yellow panel, centered, and then the top point just fell into the right place near the top of the panel. Then it was just a matter of gluing them all to the white card bases. And that went pretty quickly as well because I tend to keep a stack of those on hand, ready to go. That's a great activity on days when you want to craft, but you aren't feeling inspired. Stocking up your card bases or even die cuts, especially word die cuts, helps to really make your next crafting session go more quickly. So the easy recipe of card base, panel, and single die cut can be as simple, or you can add complexity to one or more of the ingredients to get a card design that is much less time consuming than it looks. You could use a colored card base for a different look. You could use patterned paper as your panel, and of course you can add embellishments or stamping if you've got more time. What's your best tip for quick cards? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.